Hello everybody, we're back with more Neverhood 1 Chronicles. Continue reading in the Hall of Records here. So I have been kind of doing these videos back to back. So you'll have to bear with me a little bit as my voice is getting worn out slightly from all the reading. I guess I didn't consider that part when saying, yeah, I'll read all this Hall of Records when I play the game. I was just thinking it would be just, time, but it is affecting my voice. So I'm going to try to take a few more breaks here and drink something to keep my my voice going. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start this screen here at the very top. They produce tiny, delicate green crystals in great abundance. In my hand, they appeared as so many granules of green sugar, except not gritty. Rather, these were gummy and had a flavor that made me think green thoughts. I'm sure they did. As fast as I would pop a handful of the green stuff into my mouth, the little beings would bring me more. They also brought me a cup, though to them it would be a tub of green liquid, which after I drank it, I perceived it to be wine made from the green gummy crystals. It had a very fine flavor, and it made me think rather mellow green thoughts. Sounds like it might be a hint. Look at this a little more closely here. Some of these are hints to puzzles, I believe. So green stuff. As much as the big heads, my name for them, speak to me, I never comprehend a single word they say, but I must help them drink their wine. It's not wine, buddy. One tiny being who does most of the talking seems to be in charge, since the others are always paying attention to him, and they jump to action after he speaks. I suppose he is the father of these tiny beings. While he was speaking, he also did strange dances. He looked really stupid, waving his arms about like that. After a few weeks of the father trying to talk to me, some others of these big heads dressed in tight, colorful clothing came to bother me. They rode upon wheelie things. Okay. Take a sip of drink. Hot, burning coffee at 2 in the morning. It's going to help my already screwed up throat from all the talking. Okay, next. Around and around inside the loop on my head. Did we already read this? Was it this one? I'm lost. Okay, it's this one. Me, I never comprehend a single word they say, but I must help them drink their wine. One tiny being who does most of the talk. Okay, you already read that. Around and around inside the loop on my head, one had the nerve to bounce up and down on my lips. I should have just opened my mouth and swallowed him whole. The only thing I did not really mind was the 3 beings that did flips and somersaults on the 3 spikes that stuck out of my chest. That was kind of fun. Days and days of the same thing now, eating green gummy crystals, drinking green wine, watching the father guy, my name for him, flail about like he does, and listening to his high-pitched whining. Usually I just sit and smile at him, but when my cheeks get sore, I imitate whatever he is doing. If he nods, I nod. If he shakes his head, I shake mine. I will not write in this diary unless something weird or exciting happens. How long have I been here? It is very hard to keep track of time when nothing new happens. Once again, the father guy came out to bother me with his high-pitched whining, although it seemed more fevered this time. He kept pointing off away from where we sat. When he stood up and stomped around, always pointing. It looked like a dance to me. As far as I knew, it was a dance, since I had never seen any of these little beings dance. So I stopped I stood up and danced. I tried to make the steps of my dance like the Father Guys, but he was not at all pleased with my imitation. Take another sip of drink. I was busy trying to perfect my dancing step when I was suddenly hit from all sides by food. I assumed that it was my part in this strange dance to try and catch as much of the food as I could in my mouth. I was doing pretty well, if I do say so myself. I suppose I have an advantage over the little beings since my mouth is so much bigger than any of theirs. Perhaps this is why I was chosen for this special part of the dance. More of the big heads joined the crowd that was throwing the food at me, so that I finally could not keep up with the torrent of food. I do not mean to criticize, but many of the beings did not have very good aim. I was ducking and jumping, doing my best to get my face into place to catch the food. But a lot of it just splattered against my body. A lot more just landed on the ground, so that I stepped in a bunch of it as I moved around, and still more of the big heads came out to where we all were, and they joined in the food throwing. I felt a little ridiculous since I could not possibly keep at the pace of the dance. And the little guys really showed no sign of letting up. Okay. By now, a big circle of the beings surrounded me, all of them whining and shrieking some chant, I suppose. I decided to step out of the circle and figured I would get another chance to get this dance right sometime later. But even after I stepped out of the circle, they continued to throw the food at me. What kind of food are they throwing at you? Are they throwing a spicy meatball? Are they throwing some, pizza, hamburgers, good stuff? I did not even try to catch it. I really wanted to practice this dance and try to do better the next time. As I stepped further away to get out of their throwing range, they finally stopped. They stopped their whining and shrieking chant too, and soon the big heads were cheering and clapping. I turned back to accept. Their applause. I think they appreciated that I tried so hard to catch all of the food, because as soon as I turned back, they started throwing more. I did not want to dance this food-catching dance anymore. I turned my back to the big heads, with big round heads, and walked away as fast as I could. Before I knew it, I was walking up to another group of tiny beings. These beings remained silent as I approached. No whining or shrinking or moaning. These beings are just as tiny as the first beings I lived amongst. But they have different heads. Their heads seem to be the right size for their little bodies. Their faces are featureless except for a long needle-like proboscis. These tiny beings seem to use this protuberance for all their communication and all their senses: sight, smell, taste, hearing, feelings. Some of these beings pointed their needle noses here and there over my body as I approached, but most of them kept them pointed at my feet. Just before I stepped up in front of the needle noses, my name for them, they began clapping. By the time I actually stopped, they were cheering and whooping and jumping up and down. This went on for quite a while. Then they began to quiet down, and the crowd began to split down the middle. I noticed one needle nose coming through the crowd to stand in front of me. This needle nose seemed to have the respect of all the other needle noses, because they all gave their attention to him as he stood in front of me. I could tell because all of their needle-like noses were pointed at him instead of me. He must be their father guy. Take a sip of drink. All right. After looking me over for a while, the father guy started speaking at me. I did not understand anything that he said to me, but I smiled at him the entire time that he spoke to me. I kept smiling at them all. After the father guy finished, I was trying to think of something to do. I decided to say something back to them. Well, it's really nice, I said, for all of you to come out to greet me today. You know, I couldn't stand for any more of that food-throwing dance that the big heads do. You don't have a food-throwing dance, do you? Do you guys understand me? I smiled some more after I finished and waited for something to happen. All the needle noses did was turn around and walk away. They kept looking over their shoulders as they left, but they did not seem to care if I followed or if. I stayed where I was. I decided I might as well stay where I was. I sat down and waited to see what would happen. For days and days, I sat there and nothing happened. At first, the needle noses kept looking over their shoulders at me, but after a few days, they seemed to forget I was there. After a week or so of being ignored, I was hungry, so I followed some of the needle noses around as they went about their daily chores. And every so often, they would look over their shoulders at me. Mostly, what they did all day was spit on the ground. That's what I do all day. It was a disgusting sight. They would form lines and walk through the fields, and the spit on the ground day after day, all the time spitting. Day after day, no matter where I was, no matter what I observed them do, they were always spitting. I do not know why I did not notice it before. Then I noticed all of their food came from the fields they had been spitting in all this time. Gross. Food from spit. Now that they were harvesting, they had time to notice me. For the first time since I arrived in the Needle Nose land, they offered me food. How could I accept it after seeing them spit on all the time to produce the food? I ran away, sickened to my stomach. After what I am sure must be something like 100 years, I could not take living among any of these tiny beings anymore. I was being starved by the needle nose, and I did not want to go back to the big heads to have them throw more food at me during their crazy dance. I felt defeated and hung my head in dejection. Why wouldn't you go back there? If you're starving to death, you might as well go back to the big heads and get chicken wings and some pizza and some mozzarella sticks and stuff, thrown at your face. So you don't have to eat these needle noses spit food. Now, since I was standing on a cloud of blue gas, as the gas swirled and spun, I could often see through the gas, or at least deep into the center of it. Something fuzzy, as if in the distance on the other side of the cloud, caught my eye. The shape grew larger and a little more defined as it came closer. Okay. This would be a good time to save and take another drink. Oops. All at once, I clapped my hands and whooped for joy. I did not need a crystal clear view of the object to recognize it as the very chunk of land that had broken off of Otto Borg's world and brought me to this miserable place. At once, I realized what was happening. The chunk of land was caught in a circular orbit, and the blue gas must be going in a straight line that took it through 2 points in that circle. I cried out, for sure, I am the luckiest of all Ottoborg's sons. Carefully, as it passed through the cloud of blue gas, I jumped off the springy surface of debris and onto my chunk of my father's world. I have not been on the chunk of land for about 3 minutes, long enough to make this latest entry into my journal. Gee, it's great to be back, home again. I hope I never hear the excerpt of The diary ends abruptly. It is said that the chunk of land that Ola Al was on suddenly smashed into a dirty clod that collided with it head-on. Both the chunk and the clod were traveling at great speeds upon impact. Nothing was ever seen of Alo Al again. Creaker's chunk of land was the biggest, and it was full of lakes. There was actually more land covered by water than not. Creaker survived many centuries on. One thing you got to get props to on this is I haven't seen any typos. Not a one. The chunk, long enough to learn how to create and build giant replicas of spoons and butter knives, enormous buckets filled with oversized sesame seeds, and huge loaves of bread, among other things. Creaker used the soil of the dry land on his chunk as the material for his sculptures. Whenever he would get tired of looking at one of his colossal sculptures, he would just throw it into a lake. Each of the colossal sculptures displaced enormous amounts of water, covering up a little more dry land each time one was thrown into a lake. Like if you fill up a bathtub, with too much water, and then you get in it, and then the water overflows out. When he was not sculpting, Creaker could be out scrutinizing one of his previous sculptures. He was very critical of his work. He always concluded that the sculpture did not communicate the concept that was the impetus behind the work, or he saw a hair or a bug sticking out of the clay. In any case, he was always frustrated. None of his works seemed to express his vision just the right way. He could not quite put his finger on the problem, but his general feeling was that it had to do with the size of the sculpture. If only it was a little bit bigger, he would often say to himself. Then he would heave the thing into the nearest lake. His mind was focused intently on making each new sculpture larger than the previous one, whether it be a giant replica of a red pod bulb or a mostly empty jar that had been sitting in the back of a valley for 8 weeks. Eventually, he spent very little time examining his finished works, but with an exclamation of disgust, he would throw the work into the nearest lake, which after a while seemed to be conveniently closer and closer, just as soon as it was done, and immediately start on the next one. The replicas were by this time so large that he had to climb them to work on the upper parts, because he made them so big. It's crazy. The largest sculpture Creaker ever completed was of a baby's arm holding an apple. It was such a gigantic work that he had to use spikes and ropes to get up it. When he finished, he had to rappel down the back of the arm. He backed up to get a good look at it, but could not back up very far since he was on a beach. Again, his disgust and frustration overcame him as he said, "No, no, no, that's not it at all." Then Creaker rushed at the base of the sculpture to push it into the water. He barely budged it, but it was top-heavy since the apple at the top was enormous, so that his push was enough motion to cause the sculpture to fall over. Creaker turned to start on a new sculpture. He had in mind of a great pair of tongs digging into a bucket of sand, and he never saw the tidal wave that fell upon him. Hondo's chunk of land ended upon the back of a giant animal that lived in a desert on an undocumented planet. Hondo seemed to like the animal enough, and he was so small that the animal did not detect his existence. There was not much Hondo could tell about what the animal looked like. It was a colossal beast compared to Hondo. He took many survey journeys that went on for... Take a sip of drink. Many colossal journeys that went on for days and days across the top of the beast to see if it looked different from other locations. As he walked, he noticed the color of the ground changed. Presently, he would be passing over an area that was brown. Then 15 feet or so further, he would pass over an area that was yellow. The surface he walked on was hard and mostly smooth, but it was terraced into short, flat little hills all over. When he came to the edge, he was looking around and he almost fell off. He got down on his stomach to look over the edge. There was nothing between him and the ground, which was very far away. If he had jumped, the fall would have broken every bone in his body. Okay. He was on the floor, the lip of an overhang, and he reached under it to see if he could feel how far back it went. But the overhang went straight back and kept going. Then he carefully lowered his head over to look and see how far back this overhang went. He could not see it, though. There was so much dark shadow he could only see about as far as his hand reached. Hondo got up and decided to walk directly away from the edge. He grew very tired almost immediately as the surface began ascending. Right away. It took a day to reach the summit, so he slept there. In the morning, Hondo was able to see very far from the top of the animal. The sky was all blue and the land was all beige. He saw that the highest hilly part of this animal was sloped down in all directions around from where he stood. Edge Chunk just spun in space forever. A little picture here. So this is the dude. Huh. Got the spikes coming out of his chest. Okay. All right, we'll continue here. Let's make a save. Okay, next person. Homan, not like Homer, Homer Simpson. Take a drink. We're getting there, guys. We're getting there. Quarter made Homan and gave him 2 crowns. Oh, you get 2, huh? And let him decide what to do with the extra one. Homan made a son named Pinto Bunyan, to whom he immediately gave his 2nd crown. Pinto Bunyan, I'm just going to say Pinto, helped Haman with all that he did. Haman made a bunch of beings called Yents. The Yents were blue and looked like little bugs. The blue Yents spent their first day of existence fashioning small spears. Soon the Yents had broken up into smaller communities. Each community had a specific task to accomplish, which helped all the other Yent communities. Blue Yent South was in charge of growing food. Blue Yent North built housing. You could take like a random element from this random story that we're reading here. You could take a random section, base a whole video game after it, and nobody be the wiser, because most people have never played this game. Most people have definitely not read all this. So they would never know where you pulled this information from. Okay, so Blue Yent North built housing for other communities, and so on and so forth. All was peaceful and working efficiently, so Pinto made some Yents of his own. Only his were white. Now it came about, when the white Yents began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of the blue Yents saw that the daughters of the white Yents were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves, whomever they chosen. The Hunt-Za, Mut-Za were in the world in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of blue Yents came into the daughters of white Yents, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty Yents, who were of old, Yents of renown. The white Yents instantly mingled with the blue Yents, but they refused to acknowledge the community system of the blue Yents. The white Yents enjoyed the fruits of all the blue Yents' hard work, but did not help them work at all. It only took one white yent to throw an egg at a blue yent one morning to cause a dreadful feud. To Hema of the blue yents rose with all the blue yents of war to go up to white yents Easty, and Hema chose 30,000 blue yents, valiant warriors, and sent them out at night. And he commanded them, saying, "See, you are going to ambush the city." Take a sip of drink. You are going to ambush the city from behind it. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you be ready. Then I and all the blue yents who are with me will approach the city, and it will come about when they come out to meet us at the first that we will flee before them, and they will come out after us until we have drawn them away from the city, for they will say, "They are fleeing before us as at the first." So we will flee before them, and you shall rise from your ambush and take possession of the city. Then it will be when you have seized the city that you shall set the city on fire. See, I have commanded you. Most of those yents of war in attendance could not understand Hema, for the language he used was flowery and outdated. Still few in attendance there from among all those in attendance did hearken and understand. Even did they reckon the sayings of Hema, and straightway did they clue in their buddies who were just lollygagging about, scratching their heads. At once all who heard this explanation did understand Hema's plan. So Hema sent them away, and they went to the place of ambush and remained between White Yent West and White Yent East, and the west side of White Yent East. But Hema spent that night at the Wagon Leisure Inn. Now Hema rose early in the morning and mustered the blue yents, and he went up with the elders of blue yents before the blue yents to White Yent East. Then all the blue yents of war who were there, or who were with him, went up and drew near and arrived in front of the city, and camped on the north side of White Yent East. Now there was a valley between him and White Yent East, and he took about 5,000 blue yents and set them in ambush between White Yent West and White Yent East, on the west side of the city. So they stationed the blue yents, all the army that was on the north side of the city, and its rear guard on the west side of the city, and Hema spent the night in Sid's garden spot. Lodge. And it came about when the king of White Yent East saw it, that the men of the city hurried and rose up early and went out to meet blue yents in battle. He and all his people at the appointed place before the desert plain, but he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. And Hema and all the blue yents pretended to be beaten before them and fled by the way of the wilderness. And all the people who were in the city were called together to pursue them. And they pursued Hema and were drawn away from the city. So not an int. I don't think it's really int. I think an int would be ENT. It's probably yent. Was left in White Yent East or White Yent West, who had not gone after blue yents. And we will fumble our controls here. We will stop right here, guys. Thank you very much for watching this video. Those of you that are actually watching these videos, I don't expect to get very much views on it, but hopefully I'll get a few here and there of people that are actually interested in all of this goop of a story that they're trying to say here. This is really weird. It's like it's written by different people. It feels like, I mean, it is basically. It is written by different people. Realistically, probably, and thematically. But it's weird how they put in these sections where it's like they're purposely making it. They're making it tedious to read. So like you're not going to read it, you're just going to skip it. And then there are some actual segments in here that are pretty decent. So it's very, very strange. Very strange. So we'll stop the video here, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next part. Bye.